Right, so as we know, the UK joined in with the US in attacks on Houthis in Yemen the other night, resulting in 10 targets being hit, and early reports of at least 5 Houthis having been killed and more injured. Again, it's worth reiterating that the Houthi blockade to Israeli shipping in the Red Sea hadn't killed anyone. But the only fatalities have been Houthi ones at the hands of the US at sea and at the hands of both the US and the UK in Yemen itself. This has, of course, been presented as necessary because the Houthis are a danger to shipping, but when actually it was only Israeli shipping traffic that was being affected. That other traffic could travel freely. This was an obvious siding with Israel, on trial for genocide in The Hague, as they were at the time of these strikes, in the name of preserving their economy, placing Israel's economic needs over the ethnic cleansing happening in Gaza. But commentary from an American convert to Islam, the human rights activist Shahid Bolzan, in relation to this attack on Yemen has actually got people thinking of something else driving this. A much darker motivation in relation to Israel for the UK and the US to be pursuing this action against Yemen, and it's probably something we all need to be aware of. Right, so the bombing in Yemen has appalled and disgusted most people following the situation in the Middle East right now, with Israel still committing genocide in Gaza even whilst they are on trial for genocide. Yemen blockading Israeli shipping, causing Israel economic problems, and of course the US and the UK flying in to rescue the genocidalists by picking a fight with the Houthis of Yemen, who would have stopped their attacks anyway upon Israel, ending its attacks in Gaza, instead of the US and UK demanding Israel do that too. Lives would not have been lost, and the UK wouldn't have made itself now a target for its shipping trying to pass through the Red Sea, as the Yemeni Houthis have now declared. If the US and UK thought this attack on Yemen would make them stop, they really don't understand their enemy here. Yemen, Houthis, they don't give a shit. I've used the honey badger reference to these guys before, tenacious and never quitting, and it fits. Because if Western leaders think they've achieved anything here, then they're idiots. All they've achieved is to make the Red Sea more impassable to more shipping traffic than it was before, and if they escalate to all-out war there, no shipping will get through at all. Everybody will be suffering economic knock-on hits. And for what? Deciding war is more preferable than telling Israel to end its genocide. Stupid just isn't a big enough word. They, of course, claim they did this to stop any more attacks by the Houthis. The opposite is all they will have achieved. All our government can say on the matter, via the unelected Foreign Secretary David Cameron, is to promise more attacks if Yemen don't stop. Well, they won't stop, and they won't stop if you attack them again either. Reinforcing this idiocy, possibly, and this is admittedly unverified, is a report from Yemen saying that one of the targets hit by UK Paveway 4 missiles amounted to destroying 5 tents. About $500 worth of tents destroyed with about £6 million worth of arsenal. If true, as I say, it's unverified at this point, but there are apparently photos, so we'll see if they turn up online, then that again reinforces the sheer expense and waste involved in fighting Yemen, who, as we know, have had the US shooting down $100 drones in the Red Sea with millions of dollars worth of weaponry and missiles. It's a stupidly costly action for the West to be taking for a net zero result. But is this really all about being on Israel's side here? These attacks came in the night after South Africa's excellent, detailed and forensic case against Israel in The Hague. And Shahid Bolzan, an American Islam convert and human rights activist, predominantly on Middle Eastern matters where he has lived, and he now operates a YouTube channel called Middle Nation. He's weighed in on what has happened in Yemen and drawn the dots to the case happening in the International Court of Justice. And what he's come up with I found rather interesting. He said, "It's understood that the ICJ is a political institution and its rulings are heavily political and subject to political pressure. So people have wondered, and reasonably so, what are the chances that they will actually rule against Israel, while Israel has always been fully backed by the Western powers? And the ICJ has become regarded as a tool of the Western powers, particularly of the United States. Well, you didn't have to wait for very long to see which way the court was likely to go. First of all, the evidence that's being presented by South Africa is absolutely irrefutable and damning. Their case is supremely well evidenced and meticulously detailed, and literally cites the genocidal words of Israeli officials themselves, including Netanyahu himself, and directly connects those words with the actions of the Israeli military in Gaza, So it's absolutely a devastating case, and it is impossible, frankly, to argue against it. Certainly it's impossible to argue against it with any degree of seriousness or with any comparable standard of evidence and reason as is being presented by the prosecution. Just from the first day of testimony, Israel and the United States were completely and immaculately defeated. And if you had any doubt that they realized this, that Israel and the United States realized this, then there's nothing that could have proved it more than what the US did later that day, that evening, that same evening. They attacked Yemen. They attacked Yemen because they knew they're going to lose in the International Court of Justice. This is very desperate, a very pathetic form of doubling down. Imagine their response to the irrefutable proof of genocide in Gaza is to escalate and to expand the violence to defend the genocide. They cannot defend the genocide in court, so they decide to compound the brutality by spreading it. They defend carnage by means of carnage. That's the American way. They've lost the support of the world because they lost the awe of the world. They lost the respect of the world, and they lost the fear of the world. They're backed into a corner in the world court, and they're being exposed, or they're being ensnared by the very system that they created. The system that they created to protect their impunity and to prosecute their opponents. The mechanisms of law they constructed to oppress and to prosecute and to immunize themselves is now being turned against them. So they resort to what they always resorted to. They resort to what they created the whole system to enable them to do, which is savage, primitive brute force and violence. The layers are being peeled away, the veneers being stripped off. America has been king of the hill for all these years, and they're being pulled down that hill, and all they can do is lash out. What we're seeing right now is a victory. Their vicious, barbaric instincts are only accelerating their downfall. By attacking Yemen, they're just showing the world and showing the world court that yes, it is genocide in Gaza, and it is genocide in Gaza because we think our capacity for violence makes us superior, and our capacity for violence entitles us to be violent, and so what? What are you going to do about it, world? Because what are the Houthis doing except trying to stop the genocide? One of this guy Shahid Bolson's influences, and actually what set him on the path to Islam in part, as he himself has cited, was Malcolm X. And if you listen to the guy speak for yourself on his YouTube channel, he even speaks like Malcolm X. He's got the same inflections there. But he exposes here a bigger point. Israel is stuffed at the ICJ. So many of us have thought that. They are so very badly stuffed that no matter how politically influenced the ICJ might be, and it has faced many accusations of being a US puppet court. The court president right now is literally an American, which has just compounded that. But the Bolson actually thinks that the ruling is just academic at this point. It's a foregone conclusion. Israel's defense used all the debunked nonsense they spread on social media and thinks a court will hold it up as irrefutable evidence. Whereas Bolson also maintains it's a US-controlled construct. Therefore, perhaps Israel figure that will shield them again. It won't. Not if the ICJ wants to maintain any kind of semblance of justice actually being done and then being relevant in any way, shape or form, because to rule in favour of Israel will be seen as so ridiculous the world would never take the ICJ seriously ever again. Bolson asserts, therefore, that the attack on Yemen amounts to not just a distraction, but a show of force saying we're in charge here and what we say goes, and balls to whatever the court might say at this point. It's a very worrying assertion because it implies the US, and in all likelihood the UK, would act in such a manner that they would completely ignore any ruling handed down by the International Court of Justice. Now, whether that ruling gets enforced by the UN is a complete other matter, of course. The Security Council would see it vetoed. Almost certainly the US would veto it. The UK would likely join them in that now, or at the very least abstain again. But it could, according to the lawyer who successfully sued Yugoslavia under the Genocide Convention, Francis Boyle, over their war crimes in the Balkans, see it pushed through under the Uniting for Peace Treaty. But what then? Would it just still be ignored? Well, Bolson thinks yes, and frankly, who would bet against that? But it will send a message to the rest of the world that it wouldn't just be Israel then committing genocide, would it? Are our politicians stupid enough to back this and end up accused of the same crimes Israel is right now? Yes, sadly, of course they are. Sunak and Cameron, or human rights lawyer Keir Starmer, the supposed opposition Labour leader, they would all do it. If Israel gets ruled against by the ICJ as expected, and Biden, for example, said let's bomb Yemen again over that, then our leaders here would jump immediately and join him. Should that scenario come to pass, what value then is there on global justice if the West just ignores it when it doesn't go their way? If Yemen was distraction and a warning of things to come, matters could become so much worse after the ICJ ruling gets made, assuming, as everybody thinks it will, it goes against Israel. And if you want to know just how awful the Israeli defence actually was that made Shahid Bolson and many others, myself included, think this is just a matter of formality before the ICJ is sent to South Africa's provisional order, then you should watch this video next, where I covered all of that, and I'll hope to catch you on the next bit. Cheers, folks.